In every generation, families pass down their most treasured memories and traditions. But sometimes, the most powerful family legacy isn't what's given to us, it's what we create together. What happened on Family Feud that Thursday afternoon in April 2025 wasn't just about breaking a game show record. It was about how 3 generations of the Wilson family, spanning from 18 to 86 years old, showed America that the strongest bridges between generations aren't built on nostalgia, but on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the courage to listen to each other. Their story would leave Steve Harvey in tears and teach viewers an unexpected lesson about what it truly means to be a family in modern America. The Wilson family arrived at the Family Feud studio, looking like they had stepped out of 3 different eras. Grandmother Martha, 86, wore her Sunday best, a tailored teal dress with a vintage brooch that had belonged to her mother. Her salt and pepper hair was styled in soft waves, and she walked with the aid of a simple wooden cane that her late husband had carved for her when arthritis first made walking difficult. Her son James, 52, sported a classic polo shirt and khakis, the uniform of a high school science teacher who had spent 30 years inspiring teenagers to look beyond their textbooks. His warm smile revealed laugh lines earned from decades of corny science jokes that made students groan but somehow still remember the periodic table. James's wife Layla, 50, stood confidently in a professional blazer and slacks. As the first black female principal at her elementary school, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had broken barriers without seeking recognition for doing so. Their children represented the younger generation. Maya, 26, a medical resident with her hair in neat braids, wearing scrubs because she had come straight from a 12-hour hospital shift. Trevor, 24, in a tech startup t-shirt and jeans, who had postponed a product launch to be there. And Zoe, 18, the youngest, wearing a vintage band t-shirt and ripped jeans, her natural curls framing a face still navigating the transition from teenager to adult. The Wilson family from Charlotte, North Carolina, Steve announced as they took their positions on stage. Y'all ready to play the feud? The audience cheered, but Steve noticed something unusual about this family. Unlike most contestants who bounced with nervous energy, the Wilsons stood with a calm confidence, their eyes bright with focus rather than just excitement. Before we start, Steve said, I gotta ask, what's your secret? You all look cool as cucumbers up here. Martha, the grandmother, stepped forward slightly with a warm smile. Well, Steve, when you've been watching Family Feud together for 50 years, it starts to feel like home. Steve's eyebrows shot up. 50 years? Did I hear that right? James nodded. Mom never missed an episode, not since Richard Dawson first hosted in 1976. It became our family tradition. Every host, every format change, we've seen it all. Even when I was away at college, Maya added, we'd call each other during commercial breaks to discuss our answers. Steve looked genuinely impressed. That's dedication. Let's see if all that practice pays off. The game began, and immediately the studio crew noticed something remarkable. The Wilson family moved with an unusual synchronicity. When Martha struggled to hit the buzzer quickly enough, Zoe, the youngest, would subtly step back to give her grandmother space rather than trying to beat her to it. When technical terms came up in questions, everyone deferred to James, the science teacher. For pop culture questions, the younger members took the lead. During a commercial break, Steve approached them. I've hosted for years, but I've never seen a family work together quite like this. Most families, there's always someone trying to be the star. Martha smiled. That's because we've had a lot of practice at something more important than Family Feud, Steve. What's that? He asked. Listening to each other. She replied simply. What the cameras didn't capture was the story behind Martha's words. 5 years earlier, the Wilson family had nearly fallen apart. Political differences had created deep divides. James and his mother had stopped speaking after a heated holiday argument. The grandchildren were caught in the middle, uncomfortable with the tension but unsure how to fix it. It was Zoe, then just 13, who had orchestrated the healing. She had created a family game night, specifically designed to make them talk to each other again. The rules were simple. Everyone had to actually listen before responding. And the goal wasn't to win, but to understand. The first game they played together after months of silence? A home version of Family Feud. As the game progressed, the Wilsons racked up an impressive score, but what captivated the audience wasn't just their game knowledge, it was how they worked through disagreements. During the fast money selection, a moment of tension emerged that revealed the family's deeper story. "Who's going to play fast money?" Steve asked. The family huddled. Everyone assumed James would go first. He had the highest individual score in their practice runs. But Martha stepped forward. "I'd like to try," she said, her voice firm despite her age. James looked concerned. "Mom, the timer. The pressure." Martha's eyes flashed with a hint of fire. "I might be slow on my feet, James, but my mind is still quick." The audience fell silent, sensing a deeper conversation unfolding. Steve watched carefully, resisting the urge to jump in with a joke to break the tension. Zoe spoke up. "Grandma has the highest overall accuracy rate of anyone in the family. We've been keeping stats during our practice games." Trevor nodded. "It's true. She gets fewer points sometimes because she's slower on the buzzer, but her answers match the surveys more often than any of us." James looked at his mother, and decades of complicated emotions passed between them. The audience couldn't know that this moment echoed a painful conversation from years before when James had tried to take away Martha's car keys, assuming age had slowed her reflexes too much for driving. "You're right," James said finally. "I'm sorry, Mom. You should go first." Martha patted his hand. "And you should go second. Between the two of us, we've got 50 years of watching this show. That's got to count for something." Steve, sensing the resolved tension, smiled. "All right then, Martha and James for fast money. Let's do this." The fast money round began with Martha at the podium. Despite her 86 years, she stood tall, her hands steady as she gripped her cane. "You ready, Martha?" Steve asked kindly. "I've been ready for 50 years, Steve," she replied with a wink that made the audience laugh. The clock started. Name something people are afraid of losing." "Their memories," Martha answered without hesitation. "Name a place where people speak in whispers." "Libraries." "Name something that gets wrinkled with age." Martha smiled. "Martha, skin." "Name something people check before leaving the house." "The stove." "Name a reason someone might stay up all night." "Worry about their children," Martha said, her voice softening slightly. The buzzer sounded. Steve gently touched her shoulder. "Well done, Martha. What? Let's see how you did." The board revealed memories, 27 points. Libraries, 45 points. Skin, 38 points. The stove, 18 points. Worry about children, 24 points. That's 152 points, Steve announced as the audience cheered. "That's a strong start. Now we need 48 more points from James to win the $20,000. As James took his position, Martha stepped back to join the family. The camera caught a small moment. Zoe slipped her hand into her grandmother's and squeezed gently. Martha returned the squeeze, her eyes glistening with tears that had nothing to do with the game show. The producers, watching from the control room, were transfixed. "We're getting incredible footage here," the director said. "There's something special happening with this family." James waited as Steve read the same questions. His answers came rapid fire. Their jobs, churches, clothes, their keys, a new baby. When his timer ended, Steve moved to reveal the scores. "You need 48 points to win. Let's see how you did." The first answer, jobs, 31 points. They needed just 17 more points from the remaining 4 answers. Churches, 22 points. The Wilson family had won, but Steve continued revealing the answers. Clothes, 29 points. Keys, 42 points. New baby, 35 points. The total, 311 points. the highest fast money score in Family Feud history. The studio erupted in cheers. But Steve stood frozen, staring at the board. The cameraman zoomed in on his face, capturing his stunned expression. "In all my years hosting this show," Steve finally said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet, "I have never seen a score this high." The previous record was 197 inches the regular show, and 286 inches Celebrity Family Feud. He turned to the Wilsons, who were hugging each other tightly. "You didn't just break the record, you shattered it. But I have a feeling there's more to this story than just being good at Family Feud. Am I right?" Martha stepped forward. "You are, Steve. May I share something with you and your viewers?" "Please do," Steve replied, genuinely intrigued. Martha's voice remained steady, but her eyes filled with emotion. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease." A hush fell over the studio. Steve's expression softened with compassion. "The doctors told me to keep my mind active, to challenge myself with puzzles, games, anything that made me think. My grandson Trevor suggested we start playing Family Feud at home more seriously. Not just watching, but keeping score, tracking statistics, studying patterns in the answers." She gestured toward her family. "At first, they were just humoring me. But then something unexpected happened. The game became about more than keeping my memory sharp. It became about truly seeing each other." Trevor stepped forward. "I work in tech, designing apps. I created a special Family Feud practice program for Grandma, with actual survey data we'd collected from friends and coworkers." Maya added, "And I incorporated memory exercises from my medical training into our practice sessions." Zoe, the youngest, spoke up. "But Grandma ended up teaching us more than we taught her. She showed us that knowing the right answer isn't as important as understanding why people think the way they do." James put his arm around his mother. "Mom was always good at understanding people, what they think, how they feel. That's what makes her so good at this game. And it took me too long to realize I should have been listening to her wisdom instead of worrying about her age." Martha smiled. "We're not perfect. We still disagree, sometimes strongly. But we've learned to listen first, to try to understand before being understood. That's our real family secret, Steve." Steve Harvey stood motionless, tears welling in his eyes. The camera caught the moment perfectly, the usually composed host visibly moved by this family's story. "Cut to commercial," the director ordered, but Steve held up his hand. "No," he said firmly. "Stay with me. This needs to be heard." The red light remained on. Steve wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. "Mrs. Wilson, Martha," he began, his voice unsteady. "What you just shared isn't just a nice family story. It's something America desperately needs to hear right now." He turned to face the camera directly. "Folks at home, we're living in divided times. Families torn apart by politics, by generational differences, by all kinds of things that seem important until you realize, like the Wilsons did, what's really at stake." Steve walked over to stand beside Martha. "This remarkable woman isn't just fighting to hold on to her memories. She and her family are showing us how to create new ones worth keeping." The studio remained silent as Steve continued. "I've been hosting this show for years, and I've seen thousands of families compete. Some come for the money, some for the fame, some just for fun. But the Wilsons came with a purpose that goes beyond this game." He gestured toward the score displayed on the board. "That number, 311 points, that's impressive. But it's not just about getting the most popular answers. It's about understanding why people answer the way they do. It's about empathy." Martha nodded. "That's exactly right, Steve. When you truly listen to understand someone else's perspective, you start to see patterns. You notice what connects us rather than what divides us." Steve turned to James. "You said something earlier about giving your mother the respect of going first in fast money, despite your concerns about her age. That couldn't have been easy." James shook his head. "It wasn't. But one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn is that protecting someone you love sometimes means stepping back and trusting them to know their own capabilities. Layla spoke up for the first time. As an educator, I've seen how we often underestimate people based on their age. Whether they're very young, like my students, or older, like Martha, we focus on limitations instead of possibilities. Steve nodded thoughtfully. In my career, I've made plenty of jokes about generational differences, but the Wilsons are showing us something powerful here, that the best family teams don't just tolerate their differences. They leverage them. He turned to Zoe, the youngest. Young lady, you've been pretty quiet. What's your take on all this? Zoe looked momentarily surprised to be addressed directly by Steve Harvey on national television, but she squared her shoulders and spoke clearly. I think we waste a lot of time trying to prove we're right instead of trying to learn from each other. My generation gets dismissed as being too sensitive or too attached to our phones. Grandma's generation gets dismissed as being out of touch. But when we actually listen to each other, we're all pretty smart in different ways. The audience broke into spontaneous applause. Steve smiled at Zoe with genuine respect. Out of the mouths of babes, he said. Or not so babes, because you're making a whole lot of sense for someone of any age. He turned back to address the viewers. I'm going to do something unprecedented here. The network executives are probably having heart attacks right now, but I don't care. The camera cut briefly to show producers frantically gesturing in the control room. But Steve continued. Family Feud is supposed to be a 30-minute show with a simple format. We play the game, we laugh, we give away some money, and everybody goes home happy. But today, we witness something bigger than the game. He walked to center stage. I'm extending this episode. The Wilsons have shown us something America needs. To see a family that faced a devastating diagnosis and used it not as an excuse to fall apart, but as a reason to come together. They've shown us that bridging generational divides isn't just possible, it's necessary. The network president was now on the studio floor, signaling to Steve, who acknowledged him with a nod but continued speaking. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to dive deeper into the Wilson family's story. Because this isn't just about a game show record. It's about how we treat each other as family members, as neighbors, as Americans. Stay with us. As the cameras stopped rolling for the commercial break, the network president approached Steve. What are you doing? We have a schedule to maintain. Steve stood his ground. Then change it. This is important. These people have something to teach us. And I'm not cutting them off. After a brief, tense discussion, the president relented. Fine. 20 more minutes, but that's it. Steve smiled. That'll do. Thank you. When the show resumed, Steve had arranged chairs in a semicircle for the Wilson family. Welcome back to a special extended episode of Family Feud. Today, we're doing something different. We're talking about what it really means to be a family in challenging times. He turned to Martha. You mentioned your Alzheimer's diagnosis. How has that changed your family dynamics? Martha considered the question carefully. At first, it was all about what I was losing or might lose. Everyone was focused on the disease. But then, something shifted. We started focusing on what we could still create together. New memories. New understandings. Trevor chimed in. The app I designed for Grandma wasn't just about keeping her memory sharp. It became a way for all of us to contribute our strengths. Maya brought her medical knowledge. Dad brought his teaching skills. Mom brought her administrative expertise from running a school. Zoe brought her fresh perspective. And Grandma brought her lifetime of wisdom. Maya nodded. We stopped seeing Grandma's diagnosis as just a medical condition to manage, and started seeing it as a call to connect more deeply while we still could. Steve turned to James. And you mentioned some tension between you and your mother. Was that related to her diagnosis? James shifted uncomfortably but answered honestly. Partly. I responded by trying to take control to make decisions for her rather than with her. I was so afraid of losing her that I started treating her as if she was already gone. He looked at his mother with regret in his eyes. I'm sorry for that, Mom. Martha reached for his hand. You were trying to protect me, James. It took us both some time to figure out the difference between support and control. Zoe spoke up. That's what our home family feud games taught us. Grandma might take longer to hit the buzzer, but her answers were almost always better than ours. We learned to create space for each person's strengths. Steve nodded. That's profound. Creating space for each person's strengths instead of focusing on their limitations. As the extended episode continued, Steve guided the conversation toward broader applications of the Wilson family's experience. What you've shared today goes beyond family feud, or even family dynamics, Steve said. It speaks to how we might better handle all the divisions in our society. Martha nodded thoughtfully. You know, Steve, at 86, I've lived through a lot of divided times in America. The thing I've noticed is that we often talk past each other instead of to each other. What do you mean by that? Steve asked. Well, we assume we know what someone else thinks based on their age, their appearance, their background. We stop being curious about each other as individuals. Layla added. In my school, we've started a program called Cross-Generation Conversations. We bring in seniors from the community to work with our elementary students. The transformation has been remarkable. The children gain perspective, and the seniors gain energy and purpose. Steve turned to the audience. Think about that. When was the last time you sat down with someone from a different generation and genuinely tried to understand their perspective? Not to change their mind, not to prove them wrong, just to understand. Trevor spoke up. In tech, we talk a lot about user experience and design thinking. But those principles apply to human relationships too. You have to start with empathy, truly understanding the other person's needs and perspective before trying to solve problems together. That's exactly it, Steve said excitedly. Empathy before problem solving, listening before speaking. Maya added her medical perspective. In medicine, we're trained to take a thorough history before making a diagnosis or suggesting treatment. But in our personal relationships, we often jump straight to prescribing solutions without really understanding the situation. Steve nodded. So, how do we apply this in our everyday lives? What's the practical takeaway here? Zoe, who had been listening intently, spoke up. I think it starts with a simple question. Help me understand. That's what changed our family game nights. Instead of arguing about who was right, we started asking each other, help me understand why you think that. Steve turned to the camera. You hear that, America? Help me understand. 3 simple words that could begin to heal so many divides, Martha added. And remember that understanding doesn't mean agreeing. You can understand someone's perspective without sharing it. That's how respect grows. James nodded. That's been the hardest lesson for me. I kept thinking that if Mom and I understood each other, we'd automatically agree. But real respect means acknowledging that 2 people can understand the same situation and still reach different conclusions. Steve walked to center stage, his expression serious. Folks, we came here today expecting to play a game show. Instead, we've been given a masterclass in family dynamics and human connection. He gestured to the Wilsons. This family didn't just set a record with their 311 points in fast money. They've shown us what's possible when we approach our differences with curiosity instead of judgment, with listening instead of lecturing. Martha stood slowly, leaning on her cane. May I say one more thing, Steve? Of course, he replied, stepping back to give her the floor. Martha's voice was gentle but clear. Time is precious. Whether you're 86 like me or 18 like my granddaughter, none of us knows exactly how much time we have together. Don't waste it on arguments that won't matter in the end. She looked at each of her family members with deep affection. What matters are the bridges we build, the understanding we create, and the love we share while we have the chance. Steve could no longer hold back his emotions. Tears streamed down his face as he embraced Martha gently. The camera captured the moment in all its raw authenticity, the seasoned TV host deeply moved by the wisdom of this remarkable 86-year-old woman. When he finally composed himself, Steve addressed the viewers one last time. In 50 years of Family Feud, from Richard Dawson to myself, This show has been about bringing families together for fun and prizes. But today, the Wilson family has given us something far more valuable than entertainment. They've shown us a path forward for our families, and perhaps for our nation. The episode concluded with the network president announcing that a special fund would be established in Martha Wilson's name to support Alzheimer's research and intergenerational community programs. In the months that followed, the Wilson method became a trending topic in schools, community organizations, and even corporate settings. The episode won multiple awards and was credited with inspiring thousands of families to start their own versions of understanding-based game nights. Martha's words, "Help me understand," became a cultural touchpoint, printed on t-shirts and shared widely on social media, as a reminder of how to approach differences with curiosity instead of conflict. The Wilson family returned to their lives in Charlotte. But they remained connected to Steve Harvey, who occasionally mentioned them on his show and social media. Martha's Alzheimer's progressed, but more slowly than doctors had initially predicted, which some attributed to the continued mental stimulation and emotional support she received from her family. Perhaps the most lasting impact came from an unexpected source. Zoe, inspired by the experience, changed her college major to focus on developing intergenerational communication programs. "My grandmother taught me that wisdom doesn't belong to any one generation," she explained in interviews. "It emerges in the space between us, when we truly listen to each other." The 50-year record the Wilsons set on Family Feud remains unbroken to this day. But as Steve Harvey often reminds viewers, the real record they set wasn't about points on a board. It was showing us that the greatest family victory isn't what you win together, it's what you learn together.